Nina had always prided herself on being in control. She was the kind of woman who planned her days down to the minute, who kept her emotions neatly compartmentalized, who never let anything catch her off guard. Control was her armor, her shield against the chaos of the world. It was what made her successful in her career, what kept her relationships orderly, what allowed her to navigate life with confidence and precision. But therapy was supposed to help with that control, not threaten it. When Nina first walked into Dr. Vivian Hayes' office 6 months ago, she'd expected the usual therapeutic experience, a calm, detached professional who would help her manage her stress, perhaps offer some coping strategies for the anxiety that had been creeping into her life. She never expected to feel this. Dr. Hayes was different from the beginning. There was something about her presence that filled the room in a way Nina couldn't quite explain. She was composed, yes, always so composed, but there was a warmth beneath that professional exterior that drew Nina in. Her voice was soft yet firm, like velvet wrapped around steel. When she spoke, Nina listened. When she asked questions, Nina found herself answering with a honesty that surprised even herself. At first, Nina told herself it was just the therapeutic relationship. Of course she felt connected to Dr. Hayes. That was the point, wasn't it? To feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to trust someone enough to share the parts of yourself you kept hidden from the world. But as the weeks turned into months, something shifted. Nina started noticing things she shouldn't notice. The way Dr. Hayes tilted her head when she was listening intently, a small gesture that somehow made Nina feel like she was the only person in the world who mattered. The way her eyes, those deep, penetrating eyes, seemed to see right through Nina's carefully constructed walls. The way she would lean forward slightly when Nina was struggling to find words, as if she wanted to physically pull the truth from her. There was something magnetic about Dr. Hayes, something that went beyond the professional. And Nina, despite all her self-discipline, despite all her control, found herself drawn to it like a moth to flame. The thoughts started innocently enough. Nina would leave a session and find herself replaying their conversations, analyzing not just what Dr. Hayes had said, but how she had said it. She would remember the subtle movements, the way Dr. Hayes crossed her legs, the way her fingers drummed lightly on her notebook, the way her lips curved into the slightest smile when Nina made a breakthrough. These observations felt harmless at first, but then they began to change. Nina started thinking about Dr. Hayes outside of therapy, not just thinking, fantasizing. She would catch herself wondering what Dr. Hayes did after their sessions, what her life was like beyond these walls. Did she have someone waiting for her at home? Did she think about Nina the way Nina thought about her? The fantasies grew more vivid, more intimate. Nina would imagine what it would be like to see Dr. Hayes outside of this context, at a coffee shop, at a restaurant, somewhere where the power dynamic didn't exist. What would they talk about? Would Dr. Hayes smile differently? Would she touch Nina's arm when she laughed? And then the thoughts took a darker, more dangerous turn. Nina began imagining what it would feel like to be touched by Dr. Hayes. Really touched. She would lie awake at night, her mind conjuring images she knew she shouldn't entertain. Dr. Hayes's hands, those elegant hands that gestured so expressively when she spoke, moving across Nina's skin. Her lips, which formed such careful, thoughtful words, pressed against Nina's own. The images were intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Nina tried to push them away. She would distract herself with work, with exercise, with anything that might quiet the growing hunger inside her. But the more she tried to suppress these thoughts, the stronger they became. They invaded her dreams, her waking moments, her every interaction with Dr. Hayes. And the worst part? Nina could feel herself changing during their sessions. She became hyper-aware of every moment, every glance, every accidental touch. When Dr. Hayes handed her a tissue, their fingers would brush, and Nina would feel an electric jolt that left her breathless. When Dr. Hayes leaned forward to emphasize a point, Nina would catch a hint of her perfume, something subtle and sophisticated, and it would send her mind spinning. Nina wondered if Dr. Hayes noticed. Did she see the way Nina's eyes lingered a moment too long? Did she hear the slight catch in Nina's breath when they made eye contact? Did she sense the tension that seemed to thicken the air between them with each passing week? If she did, she never let on. Dr. Hayes remained as professional as always, maintaining the boundaries that were supposed to exist between therapist and patient. But sometimes, just sometimes, Nina thought she caught something in Dr. Hayes's expression, a flicker of recognition, perhaps. A moment where her gaze seemed to soften in a way that went beyond therapeutic concern. Or maybe Nina was just seeing what she wanted to see. The tension came to a head on a Thursday afternoon in late autumn. Nina arrived at Dr. Hayes's office feeling particularly restless. She had spent the previous night unable to sleep, her mind consumed with thoughts she couldn't control. By the time she sat down in the familiar chair across from Dr. Hayes, her body felt like a live wire, humming with an energy she didn't know how to contain. "How are you feeling today, Nina?" Dr. Hayes asked, her voice as calm and measured as ever. Nina opened her mouth to give her usual response, some version of fine or managing, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she possibly explain what she was feeling? How could she tell Dr. Hayes that she spent every waking moment thinking about her, wanting her, craving something that could never be? Nina started, then faltered. "I'm struggling." Dr. Hayes leaned forward slightly, her expression attentive. "With what specifically?" Nina's heart began to race. She could feel heat creeping up her neck, spreading across her cheeks. "With boundaries," she said carefully. "With knowing what's appropriate and what isn't." Something shifted in Dr. Hayes's expression just barely, but Nina caught it. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a subtle tension in her jaw. "Can you elaborate on that?" Nina's hands trembled in her lap. She gripped them together, trying to steady herself. "Sometimes I feel things that I don't think I should feel," she said quietly. "Things that make me question everything." "What kind of things?" Dr. Hayes asked, her voice gentle but probing. Nina closed her eyes. This was it, the moment she either pulled back or stepped over the edge. Every instinct told her to retreat, to deflect, to maintain the facade. But she was so tired of pretending. So tired of fighting against the current that had been pulling her under for months. "I think about you," Nina whispered, her eyes still closed. "All the time. In ways that go beyond therapy." The silence that followed felt eternal. Nina kept her eyes shut, unable to face whatever expression might be on Dr. Hayes's face. She waited for the gentle rejection, for the professional redirection, for the conversation about transference and boundaries that would put everything back in its proper place. But instead, she heard Dr. Hayes's voice, softer than before. "Nina, look at me." Slowly, reluctantly, Nina opened her eyes. Dr. Hayes was watching her with an intensity that made Nina's breath catch. There was no judgment in her expression, no disapproval. Instead, there was something else, something Nina couldn't quite name, but that sent a shiver down her spine. "What you're experiencing is not uncommon," Dr. Hayes said carefully. "It's called transference. When we feel safe with someone, when we open ourselves up in vulnerable ways, it's natural for those feelings to sometimes manifest as attraction or desire." Nina nodded, even though every word felt like a dismissal of what she knew to be true. This wasn't just transference. This was real, visceral, undeniable. "But I need you to understand something, Doctor," Hayes continued, her eyes never leaving Nina's. These feelings, however real they may seem to you, they exist within a very specific context. Our relationship is bound by ethical guidelines, by professional boundaries that exist for good reasons. I know that, Nina said, her voice barely audible. I know all of that. But it doesn't change how I feel. Dr. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Nina watched as something flickered across her face, a brief crack in that professional composure. No, Doctor, Hayes said finally. I suppose it doesn't. They sat in silence, the weight of Nina's confession hanging between them. Nina could feel her heart pounding, could feel the heat of embarrassment and desire warring inside her. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. I think, Dr. Hayes said slowly, that we need to talk about what this means for our therapeutic relationship moving forward. These feelings you're experiencing, they need to be addressed, but we have to be very careful about how we do that. Nina nodded, though part of her wanted to scream. She didn't want to be careful. She didn't want to analyze and deconstruct these feelings until they became nothing more than a case study in psychology. She wanted to feel, to act, to let herself fall into the dangerous thing that had been building between them. But she stayed silent, her hands still trembling in her lap. Dr. Hayes glanced at the clock on her desk. We're running out of time for today, she said, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. But I want you to know that what you've shared with me today took courage. We'll continue this conversation next week, and we'll figure out together how to navigate this. Nina stood on shaky legs, gathering her bag. As she moved toward the door, she felt Dr. Hayes's eyes on her, following her movement. She paused with her hand on the doorknob, unable to resist one last look back. Dr. Hayes was still sitting in her chair, but her composed mask had slipped just slightly. There was something in her expression that Nina had never seen before, something that looked almost like longing. Nina, Dr. Hayes said softly. Yes? This isn't easy for me either. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Nina's breath caught in her throat, her mind racing to understand what Dr. Hayes meant. But before she could respond, Doctor, Hayes looked away, that professional mask sliding back into place. I'll see you next week, Dr. Hayes said, her voice once again controlled and measured. Nina left the office in a daze, those final words echoing in her mind. This isn't easy for me either. What did that mean? Was Dr. Hayes acknowledging that she felt something too? Or was she simply expressing the difficulty of navigating a complex therapeutic situation? The week that followed was torture. Nina couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except those 5 words. She replayed the moment over and over, analyzing Dr. Hayes's tone, her expression, the way she had looked away as if the admission had cost her something. Nina found herself touching her own body more frequently, seeking release from the tension that had built to an almost unbearable level. But even in those moments of solitary pleasure, it was Dr. Hayes's face she saw, Dr. Hayes's voice she heard, Dr. Hayes's hands she imagined. The fantasies grew more detailed, more consuming. Nina would imagine Dr. Hayes pulling her close, whispering that the boundaries didn't matter, that what they felt for each other was more important than any professional code. She would imagine the feeling of Dr. Hayes's lips against her neck, her hands exploring places that ached to be touched. And then, in the aftermath, the guilt would come crashing down. What was she doing? Dr. Hayes was her therapist. This was wrong on every level. She was destroying the one relationship that had helped her feel truly seen and understood. By the time Thursday came around again, Nina was a wreck. She stood outside Dr. Hayes's office building for 10 minutes, debating whether to go in at all. Part of her wanted to run, to never face Dr. Hayes again, to let this dangerous thing die before it could grow any further. But a stronger part of her needed to know, needed to understand what Dr. Hayes had meant, needed to see if there was any possibility that this feeling was mutual. She climbed the stairs to Dr. Hayes's office on trembling legs. When she entered the waiting room, her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The receptionist smiled at her the same smile as always and told her Dr. Hayes would be ready in just a moment. Those moments felt like hours. Finally, the door to Dr. Hayes's office opened, and there she was. Dr. Hayes looked the same as always, professionally dressed, perfectly composed, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. But when their eyes met, Nina saw something flicker in that controlled expression. Recognition, awareness, maybe even nervousness. "Nina," Dr. Hayes said, her voice steady despite whatever she might be feeling. "Come in." Nina walked into the office on unsteady legs. The familiar space felt different now, charged with an electricity that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had always been there, and Nina was only now allowing herself to fully feel it. She sat in her usual chair, but she couldn't meet Dr. Hayes's eyes. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. "How have you been?" Dr. Hayes asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Confused," Nina answered honestly. "Your last words to me. I haven't been able to stop thinking about them." Dr. Hayes was quiet for a moment. When Nina finally looked up, she found Dr. Hayes watching her with an expression that was difficult to read. "I've been thinking about them too, Doctor," Hayes admitted quietly. "I shouldn't have said what I did. It was unprofessional." "But did you mean it?" Nina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Doctor." Hayes closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, Nina saw something raw and unguarded in her gaze. "Yes," she said simply. "I meant it." The admission hung in the air between them, and Nina felt her entire world tilt on its axis. The confession changed everything and nothing all at once. Nina sat frozen in her chair, Dr. Hayes's words echoing in her mind. "Yes, I meant it." 3 simple words that shattered every assumption Nina had held about their relationship, about the boundaries that were supposed to protect them both. Dr. Hayes stood abruptly, turning away from Nina to face the window. Her shoulders were tense, her posture no longer the picture of professional composure that Nina had come to know. For a long moment, she said nothing, and Nina could only watch, her heart hammering against her ribs. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Dr. Hayes said finally, her voice tight. "From the very first session with you, Nina, I knew you were going to be different." Nina's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Dr. Hayes turned back to face her, and for the first time, Nina saw genuine emotion breaking through that carefully maintained exterior. There was conflict in her eyes, a war between duty and desire that Nina recognized all too well because she had been fighting the same battle for months. "I mean that I've been a therapist for 15 years, Dr. Hayes said, her voice strained. 15 years of maintaining appropriate boundaries, of never once letting my personal feelings interfere with my professional obligations. And then you walked into my office, and everything I thought I knew about myself, about my ability to remain detached and objective." She trailed off, shaking her head. "It all fell apart." Nina rose from her chair slowly, as if any sudden movement might shatter this fragile moment of honesty. "You felt it too? From the beginning?" "Not at first," Dr. Hayes admitted, wrapping her arms around herself in an uncharacteristically vulnerable gesture. "At first, I thought you were just another client. Someone I could help. Someone whose story I could listen to without getting personally involved. But then you started opening up, showing me who you really were beneath all that control you project to the world. And I..." She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I found myself looking forward to our sessions in a way that had nothing to do with professional interest. Nina took a step closer, drawn by an invisible force she no longer had the strength to resist. Then why didn't you say anything? Dr. Hayes let out a bitter laugh. Because I'm your therapist, Nina. Because there are ethical guidelines, legal restrictions, professional standards that exist for very good reasons. Because acting on these feelings would be a betrayal of the trust you placed in me, a violation of every principle I've built my career on. But you feel them anyway, Nina said softly. Yes, Dr. Hayes whispered, and the admission seemed to cost her something. God help me, yes. I feel them anyway. The distance between them felt both impossibly vast and dangerously small. Nina could see the conflict playing out across Dr. Hayes's face, the desire warring with responsibility, the longing fighting against professional duty. It was a mirror of everything Nina had been experiencing, magnified by the weight of Dr. Hayes's position and the power imbalance inherent in their relationship. So, what do we do? Nina asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Part of her had known from the moment she first acknowledged these feelings that there was no simple solution, no easy way forward. Dr. Hayes moved back to her desk, putting physical distance between them, as if that might somehow make this easier. The ethical thing, she said, her voice regaining some of its professional steadiness, would be for me to terminate our therapeutic relationship and refer you to another therapist. That's what the guidelines recommend when boundaries become compromised. The thought of never seeing Dr. Hayes again sent a spike of panic through Nina's chest. Is that what you want? What I want is irrelevant, Dr. Hayes said firmly, though her eyes told a different story. What matters is what's best for you, what's ethical, what's... I don't want another therapist. Nina interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. I don't want to pretend these feelings don't exist. I don't want to keep lying to myself about what this is. Dr. Hayes closed her eyes, her jaw tight with tension. Nina, you don't understand what you're asking. If I cross this line with you, I could lose my license. I could lose everything I've worked for, and you would lose the therapeutic support you came here seeking. Whatever this is between us, it's built on a foundation of power imbalance and professional obligation. Acting on it would be... Would be what? Nina challenged, taking another step forward. Would be honest? Would be real? Would be acknowledging what we both clearly feel? Would be wrong, Dr. Hayes said. But the word lacked conviction. Nina stood before her now, close enough to see the rapid pulse at Dr. Hayes's throat, close enough to catch that subtle scent of perfume that had haunted her dreams for months. Then why does it feel like the only right thing I've wanted in years? Dr. Hayes's breath hitched, her composure cracking further. Nina, please, you need to understand what you're asking of me. I'm not just your therapist, I'm the person you've trusted with your vulnerabilities, your fears, your deepest thoughts. Using that knowledge, that access to your inner world, for personal gain would be a fundamental betrayal. Even if it's what I want? Nina asked softly. Even if I'm asking you to? Especially then, Doctor, Hayes said, though her voice wavered. Because part of my job is to protect you, even from yourself, even from your own desires, when they might ultimately harm you. Nina felt tears prick at her eyes, frustration and longing mixing into something almost painful. So we just ignore this? We pretend it doesn't exist and try to go back to how things were before? We can't go back, Dr. Hayes said quietly. I think we both know that. Once these things are spoken aloud, once the boundaries have been acknowledged as compromised. She trailed off, running a hand over her face in a gesture of exhaustion. I don't know, Nina. I honestly don't know what the right answer is here. They stood in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them both. Nina could see the struggle in Dr. Hayes's eyes, could feel the tension radiating from her body. This woman who had always seemed so certain, so in control, was now just as lost as Nina felt. "Can I ask you something?" Nina said finally. Dr. Hayes nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "If things were different, if I wasn't your patient, if we had met in any other context, would you want this? Would you want me?" The question hung between them, dangerous and necessary. Dr. Hayes looked at Nina for a long moment. And in that gaze, Nina saw everything she needed to know. The desire was there, unmistakable and raw. The longing was real. The connection they had felt wasn't one-sided or imagined. "Yes!" Dr. Hayes breathed, the word barely audible. "God, yes!" If things were different, if the circumstances were anything other than what they are, I would. She stopped herself, shaking her head as if trying to physically dislodge the thoughts. "But they're not different, Nina. We can't change the reality of our situation. What if I stopped being your patient?" Nina asked, the idea forming even as she spoke it. "What if I terminated our therapeutic relationship? Then the ethical issues would be resolved, wouldn't they?" Dr. Hayes looked at her sharply. "It's not that simple. Even after termination, there are guidelines about how long a therapist should wait before pursuing any kind of personal relationship with a former patient. 2 years is the recommended minimum. And even then, it's heavily discouraged because of the inherent power dynamics that don't simply disappear once therapy ends." 2 years, Nina repeated, the timeline feeling both impossibly long and somehow manageable, if it meant the possibility of exploring whatever this was with Dr. Hayes, if it meant not having to suppress these feelings forever. Couldn't she wait 2 years? But even as she thought it, she knew the truth. 2 years wouldn't change anything. The intensity of what she felt now, the consuming need that had taken over her life, it wouldn't survive that long in suspended animation. Either it would fade into nothing, or it would fester and grow into something unhealthy and obsessive. "I can't wait 2 years, Nina said honestly. "I can barely make it through 2 days without thinking about you constantly, without wanting." "Don't," Dr. Hayes said sharply, holding up a hand. "Please don't finish that sentence." But Nina was tired of holding back, tired of being careful. "Without wanting to touch you," she continued, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Without imagining what it would feel like to kiss you, to be held by you. To stop pretending that what I feel for you is anything other than desire." Dr. Hayes's eyes darkened, her breathing becoming shallow. "Nina, I know it's wrong," Nina pressed on. "I know all the reasons why this can't happen. But I also know that I've never felt anything as real as this, as powerful as this. And I think, no, I know that you feel it too." "What I feel doesn't matter," Dr. Hayes said. But her voice had lost its firmness. She sounded tired, conflicted, like a woman at the end of her ability to fight. "It matters to me," Nina whispered. They stood there, inches apart, but miles away, caught in the impossible space between what they wanted and what was allowed. Nina could see Dr. Hayes wavering, could see the moments stretching out between surrender and restraint. And then, slowly, Dr. Hayes reached out. Her hand trembled as it moved toward Nina's face, hovering just before making contact, as if this final barrier was the hardest one to cross. Nina held perfectly still, barely breathing, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell was holding them in this moment. When Dr. Hayes's fingers finally touched Nina's cheek, the contact was electric. It was just a simple touch, just skin against skin, but it felt like everything Nina had been craving for months. Dr. Hayes's hand was warm, her touch gentle, and in that moment, all the professional distance that had existed between them evaporated. "This is such a mistake," Dr. Hayes murmured, but she didn't pull away. "Then let's make it together," Nina said softly. Dr. Hayes's eyes searched Nina's face, looking for something, doubt, perhaps, or hesitation, some sign that would give her the strength to step back, to be the professional she was supposed to be. But Nina had no doubt left. Whatever consequences came from this moment, whatever price they would have to pay, she wanted this more than she had ever wanted anything. "If we do this," Dr. Hayes said slowly, her hand still cradling Nina's face, "everything changes. I can't be your therapist anymore. Our sessions end today. And we have to be prepared for the fact that this might not be what we think it is, that the intensity you're feeling might be tied to the therapeutic relationship in ways we don't fully understand." "I'm willing to take that risk," Nina said without hesitation. "And if I lose my license? If this comes out and the ethics board investigates? The consequences could be severe, Nina. For both of us, but especially for me." "Then we'll be careful," Nina said. "We'll wait whatever time we need to wait to make it less risky. But please, Vivian." It was the first time she had used Dr. Hayes's first name, and it felt both foreign and right on her tongue. "Please don't ask me to walk away from this without even knowing what it could be." Hearing her name seemed to affect Vivian deeply. Something shifted in her expression, a final wall crumbling. "I don't think I can," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "I've tried, Nina. For months, I've tried to maintain professional distance, to keep these feelings buried, but I can't anymore. I don't have the strength." "Then don't," Nina breathed. Vivian's other hand came up to frame Nina's face, holding her gently but firmly. "This ends our therapeutic relationship," she said, needing to establish this boundary clearly. "As of this moment, I am no longer your therapist. Do you understand that?" "Yes," Nina said. "And you still want this?" "More than anything." Vivian leaned in slowly, giving Nina every opportunity to pull back, to change her mind. But Nina didn't move away. She had spent months wanting this, imagining this. And now that it was finally happening, she felt completely certain. When their lips met, it was like nothing Nina had ever experienced. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if they were both still half afraid of what they were doing. But then something ignited between them, and the gentleness gave way to urgency. Vivian's hands slid into Nina's hair, pulling her closer, and Nina's arms wrapped around Vivian's waist, feeling the warmth of her body through the fabric of her blouse. The kiss deepened, becoming more heated, more desperate. It was months of suppressed longing finally being released, months of tension and denied attraction pouring out in this single moment of connection. Nina felt like she was drowning and being saved all at once, like everything she'd been holding back was finally free to exist. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vivian rested her forehead against Nina's. "We can't do this here," she said, her voice rough. "Not in my office. Not where." "I know," Nina said, understanding. This space was too tied to their former relationship, too loaded with the professional dynamic they were trying to leave behind. "Then where?" Vivian pulled back slightly, her hands still on Nina's face. "My apartment," she said. "We can go to my apartment. But Nina, I need you to be absolutely sure. Once we cross this line completely, there's no going back. We need to be certain this is what we both want, not just what feels good in the moment." "I've never been more certain of anything," Nina said firmly. Vivian studied her for another long moment, then nodded slowly. Give me 10 minutes to cancel my remaining appointments for the day. Wait in the coffee shop across the street. I'll meet you there. Nina reluctantly pulled away, already missing the warmth of Vivian's touch. As she gathered her things and moved toward the door, she caught Vivian watching her with an expression of mingled desire and apprehension. Nina! Vivian called out just as Nina reached for the doorknob. Yes? I want you to know that whatever happens after today, this isn't something I take lightly. You matter to me not just as a patient, but as a person. I need you to know that. Nina felt warmth spread through her chest. I know, she said softly. You matter to me too. That's why I'm willing to risk everything for this. The 10 minutes Nina spent in the coffee shop were the longest of her life. She sat by the window, watching the entrance to Vivian's building, nursing a cup of tea she didn't taste. Her mind raced with possibilities and consequences. What if Vivian changed her mind? What if the reality of what they were about to do hit her once Nina was gone, and she decided the risk was too great? But then Vivian appeared, walking out of the building with her briefcase and jacket, looking every bit the composed professional, except for the slight flush in her cheeks and the way her eyes immediately sought out Nina through the coffee shop window. Nina stood, leaving her untouched tea behind, and met Vivian outside. They didn't speak as they walked to Vivian's car, didn't touch, maintaining a careful distance that felt almost painful after the intimacy they had just shared. But once they were inside the car, doors closed against the outside world, Vivian reached over and took Nina's hand. Last chance to change your mind, Vivian said, though her grip on Nina's hand suggested she hoped no such thing would happen. I'm not changing my mind, Nina said firmly. Vivian nodded, starting the car. The drive to her apartment took 15 minutes, and the tension in the enclosed space was almost unbearable. Nina kept stealing glances at Vivian's profile, the strong line of her jaw, the elegant curve of her neck, the way her hands gripped the steering wheel with just slightly more force than necessary. This was real. This was actually happening. Vivian's apartment was in a quiet neighborhood, a third-floor walk-up in a well-maintained building. As they climbed the stairs, Nina felt her heart pounding harder with each step. This was it. The moment where fantasy would either become reality or shatter under the weight of real-world consequences. Vivian unlocked her door with slightly shaking hands, and they stepped inside together. The apartment was exactly what Nina would have expected. Tastefully decorated, organized but lived in, with bookshelves lining most of the walls, and soft, warm lighting that made the space feel intimate and welcoming. The moment the door closed behind them, Vivian turned to Nina. Are you? Nina didn't let her finish the question. She closed the distance between them and kissed Vivian again, answering with actions what words couldn't adequately express. This kiss was different from the one in the office, more certain, more demanding. They weren't therapist and patient anymore. They weren't bound by professional ethics or power dynamics. They were just two women who wanted each other, finally free to act on that desire. Vivian responded with equal fervor, backing Nina against the door as the kiss deepened. Her hands roamed Nina's body with a hunger that had clearly been building for as long as Nina's own desire had been growing. When Vivian's lips moved to Nina's neck, Nina gasped, her head falling back against the door as pleasure radiated from every point of contact. Bedroom, Vivian murmured against Nina's skin, and Nina could only nod. They moved through the apartment in a tangle of limbs and desperate kisses, pausing every few steps because neither could bear to break contact for long. When they finally reached the bedroom, Vivian pulled back just enough to look into Nina's eyes. I need to know you're okay, she said, her voice husky but serious. I need to know this is what you want, and that you're not going to regret it tomorrow. Nina reached up to cup Vivian's face, mirroring the gesture from earlier. Vivian, I have spent months thinking about this. wanting this, dreaming about this. I'm not going to regret it. The only thing I would regret is walking away without knowing what this could be between us." Vivian searched her face for a long moment, then nodded. "I've wanted this too," she admitted quietly. "From the moment you walked into my office for that very first session, wearing that blue dress and looking so determined to have everything in your life under control, I felt something. I told myself it was just professional interest, just recognition of someone who needed help. But I was lying to myself." "Tell me the truth now," Nina whispered. "The truth is that I would find myself thinking about you between sessions, wondering what you were doing, how you were feeling. I would replay our conversations in my mind, not for clinical purposes, but because I missed the sound of your voice, the way you laughed when you let your guard down. The truth is that I've been falling for you for months, and every session was torture because I couldn't tell you, couldn't show you, couldn't be anything other than your therapist." Nina's heart swelled at the confession. "And now?" "Now," Vivian said, her hands moving to the buttons of Nina's shirt. "I don't have to be your therapist anymore. Now I can be exactly what I want to be." "Which is yours," Vivian said simply, and kissed her again. What followed was tender and passionate in equal measure. Vivian undressed Nina slowly, reverently, as if she were unwrapping something precious. Every new inch of exposed skin was met with gentle kisses, soft caresses, whispered words of appreciation. Nina had never felt so seen, so desired, so completely accepted. When it was Nina's turn to undress Vivian, her hands trembled with anticipation and nervousness. This was the woman she had fantasized about for months, the woman whose image had filled her dreams and haunted her waking hours. Seeing her now, real and vulnerable and wanting, was almost overwhelming. They came together on Vivian's bed, skin against skin, and the sensation was everything Nina had imagined, and more. Vivian's touch was confident but gentle, knowing but curious, as if she were learning Nina's body like a new language. She paid attention to every gasp, every shiver, adjusting her movements to maximize Nina's pleasure. "Tell me what you want," Vivian murmured against Nina's ear, her hand trailing down Nina's stomach. "I want to make you feel good." Nina could barely form words, her body arcing into Vivian's touch. "You," she managed. "Just you. All of you." Vivian's response was to increase the intimacy of her caresses, her hands and mouth working in concert to drive Nina toward the edge of pleasure. Nina had touched herself countless times imagining this moment, but the reality was so far beyond her fantasies that she felt almost overwhelmed. This was real. Vivian was real. The connection between them, the desire, the care, it was all real. When Nina finally shattered, crying out Vivian's name, it felt like a release of months of tension and longing. Vivian held her through it, whispering soft words of encouragement and affection, making Nina feel safe even in the midst of such vulnerability. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Nina explored Vivian's body with the same reverence Vivian had shown her. She wanted to memorize every curve, every sensitive spot, every sound Vivian made when Nina touched her just right. When Vivian came apart in her arms, Nina felt a surge of satisfaction and joy that went beyond the physical. This was intimacy in its truest form, not just bodies connecting, but souls. They made love again, slower this time, savoring each moment, and then again, unable to get enough of each other, making up for months of denial and restraint. Finally, exhausted and sated, they lay facing each other in the dimming afternoon light. Vivian reached out to brush a strand of hair from Nina's face, her touch infinitely tender. "I don't regret this," Vivian said softly. "I know I should. I know I've crossed every professional boundary, violated every ethical guideline, but I don't regret it. Neither do I, Nina said, leaning into Vivian's touch. But we need to talk about what happens now. Vivian continued, her expression growing more serious. This can't be something we take lightly. There are real consequences we need to consider. Nina nodded, though part of her wanted to stay in this perfect bubble, where consequences didn't matter. I know. I'll need to formally terminate our therapeutic relationship with documentation. You'll need to find another therapist, someone who can actually help you without this complication. And we need to be discreet, at least for a while. If this gets out before enough time has passed, the ethics board could investigate, and I could lose my license. How long do we need to wait before? Nina trailed off, not sure how to phrase it. Before we can be open about this? Officially, 2 years from the termination date. But Nina, I need you to understand that even waiting 2 years doesn't guarantee there won't be consequences. The power dynamic that existed between us doesn't simply disappear because time has passed. I understand, Nina said, but I also know that what I feel for you isn't because you were my therapist. Yes, that's how we met, and maybe that context shaped things initially. But what I feel now, what I felt for months, it's about you, Vivian. Not Dr. Hayes the therapist, but you as a person. Vivian smiled softly. I want to believe that. I do believe that. But we need to be honest with ourselves about the complexity of this situation. So what are you saying? Nina asked, fear suddenly creeping in. That this was a one-time thing? That we can't see each other again? No, Vivian said quickly, taking Nina's hand. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that we need to be careful. We need to be thoughtful about how we proceed. This isn't just about what we want, it's about protecting both of us from potential consequences. Nina squeezed Vivian's hand. Then we'll be careful. We'll be discreet. We'll do whatever we need to do to make this work. You're willing to keep this secret for 2 years? Vivian asked, her tone skeptical. You're willing to not tell your friends? Not post about it on social media? Not do any of the normal things people do when they're in a relationship? Nina hadn't thought about it in those terms, but she nodded anyway. If that's what it takes to be with you, yes. Vivian looked at her for a long moment, then pulled her close, holding her tightly. I don't deserve you, she murmured into Nina's hair. Yes, you do, Nina said firmly. You deserve someone who sees you, really sees you, not just as a professional, but as a person. You deserve someone who wants you for who you are, not what you can do for them. And I think maybe I'm that person for you. You are, Vivian said softly. God help us both, but you are. They lay together in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Nina knew that Vivian was right to be concerned about the complexities and consequences of their relationship. But she also knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that this was right. Whatever challenges they would face, whatever price they might have to pay, this connection between them was worth fighting for. What are you thinking? Vivian asked after a while. I'm thinking about how different this is from what I expected when I first came to therapy, Nina said with a small laugh. I was looking for help managing stress and anxiety. I never expected to find this. Neither did I, Vivian admitted. I've been a therapist for 15 years, and I've never once been tempted to cross professional boundaries. Not once. And then you walked in, and everything I thought I knew about myself and my professional ethics just crumbled. Do you think that means something? Nina asked. That we were both willing to risk so much? I think it means we need to be very careful, Vivian said. Because what we're risking isn't just professional consequences, we're risking each other. If this doesn't work out, If the reality of a relationship doesn't live up to what we've built up in our minds during all those months of denial, then we'll have destroyed something that was genuinely valuable, our therapeutic relationship, for nothing. It won't be for nothing, Nina said with conviction. I know this is real, Vivian. I know the difference between fantasy and genuine connection. What I feel for you isn't just about forbidden attraction or transference, or any of the clinical terms you might use to explain it away. It's real. Vivian smiled, though there was still worry in her eyes. I believe you. I do. But we need to take this slowly. Be thoughtful about how we build a relationship outside the context of therapy. We need to get to know each other as equals, without the power dynamic that's been present in all our interactions so far. Then that's what we'll do, Nina said. We'll take it slow. We'll be careful. We'll figure this out together. Together, Vivian echoed, and kissed her softly. As the evening deepened into night, they talked, really talked for the first time as equals, rather than therapist and patient. They shared stories from their pasts, their hopes for the future, their fears and insecurities. Nina learned that Vivian had always wanted to be a writer, but had chosen therapy because it felt more practical. Vivian learned that Nina had a passion for photography that she had abandoned years ago because it didn't fit with her carefully controlled life plan. They ordered takeout and ate it in bed, laughing about the awkwardness of this first date that was so far from traditional. They talked about movies and books and music, discovering surprising areas of overlap and delighting in their differences. And later, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, sated and sleepy, Nina felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. Yes, there would be challenges ahead. Yes, they would have to be careful and discreet. Yes, there were no guarantees that this would work out in the long run. But for now, in this moment, Nina was exactly where she wanted to be, with someone who saw her, who wanted her, who made her feel alive in ways she had forgotten were possible. Stay tonight, Vivian murmured, half asleep. Don't go. I'm not going anywhere, Nina promised, pressing a kiss to Vivian's forehead. As Vivian's breathing evened out in sleep, Nina lay awake a while longer, thinking about everything that had happened. She had come to therapy seeking control, seeking help, managing the anxiety and stress that came from trying to keep every aspect of her life perfectly ordered. Instead, she had found the most beautifully uncontrollable thing imaginable: love. Because that's what this was, Nina realized. Not just desire, not just attraction, but actual love. She was falling in love with Vivian Hayes, and somehow, miraculously, Vivian was falling in love with her too. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. They would have to navigate professional ethics, maintain secrecy, and build a relationship under circumstances that were far from ideal. But as Nina drifted off to sleep, Vivian's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, she knew with absolute certainty that it would be worth it. Some things were worth the risk. Some connections were worth fighting for. And this, what they had found together, was worth everything. Thank you for reading this story. I hope it resonated with you and captured the complexity of forbidden attraction, the struggle between duty and desire, and the courage it takes to pursue genuine connection even when the circumstances are difficult. While this story explores mature themes of professional boundaries being crossed, it's ultimately about two people finding authentic love in unexpected circumstances and being willing to face the consequences of their choices together.